I'm Lauren Evinrude, Chair of the Shepherd Center Board. We sponsor TRIAD along with Goodhue Sheriff's Department and the Cannon Falls PD. A lot of people call John Hobert, our speaker today, a Renaissance man. I don't disagree with that, but I believe that he's a consummate teacher and a mentor because of his long time work with the Cannon Falls schools, and has impacted many students, including Rod Johnson, our executive director, was one of John's students. But John has also worked closely with the farm business management program at the Riverland Community College, and he still works with farmers, young farmers in particular, and that's his area of expertise. In 1986, he was named the Minnesota Agri-Science Teacher of the Year, and in 1989, he was named the Minnesota Association of the Education of Ag Educators Award. He didn't know that I knew that, but I brought it up a year or two ago, and he said, "Where'd you find that on?" Well, I know a lot of stuff. Anyway, John has also been active at St. Ansgar's Lutheran Church down the road here, and he's served in the council. He's been president of the council, and in 2011 he brought a delegation of our church leaders to Concordia University. I was involved in planning a church crime and safety symposium at the time, and John took it very seriously, because since that time he's been working very closely with the experts around the country on church crime and safety. Carl Chin, who is the national expert, and John have talked, and John will be sharing some of those research statistics. That's important to me, because anybody can talk about a subject that you read about, but John is the kind of person that does his homework. So what you're getting today is the state of church crime and safety in our country, so and probably in North America. I can talk more, but I'd rather have you listen to John.
But start out, I like to start off with a little joke of some kind. Paul Schluter, you guys, everybody? Paul's had a lot of jobs before he finally retired. He still does taxes, but his first job, he worked at an orange juice factory, but he got canned. Then he went to work in the woods as a lumberjack, but he couldn't hack it. So they gave him the axe. And after that, he tried being a tailor, but wasn't suited for it, mainly because he was a so-so guy. Next, he tried working in a muffler factory, but that was too exhausting. Then he tried being a chef, figured it would add a little spice to his life, but he just didn't have the time. And next, he attempted being a deli worker, but anyway, he sliced it. He couldn't cut the mustard. So that's a little background on Paul, if you guys know him a little bit there. I like to pick on somebody every meeting. Lauren, unfortunately, got picked on at church when we did that one. Well, I'm John Hobert. I want to thank Lauren for his kind comments, but it certainly wasn't necessary. But I do have a passion for my topic today to share with you, and hopefully you'll take a few things back to your home churches or that you all belong to, and maybe implement some ideas that we've tried to do at St. Ansgar's. You may not agree with everything we did, but I can just share with you what we've done. And I'm going to ask, Rosie's going to help me with the slides here today, but to open up though, Lauren mentioned a book, Evil Invades the Sanctuary. I might recommend this reading for anybody that would like to get more detail on what I'm talking about today. And I'd like to just read something from the foreword. And I think this is what church security is all about. The author was being transported from an airport to a church where he was to speak, this gentleman here, and he asked about the conference subject, the driver. I told him it was about security and faith-based organizations. He said that that was a subject he often considered, but concluded that security in a church is like a busy intersection in need of a traffic light. Many observe the need and talk about it, but little gets done until somebody gets hurt. Then it's spot on. So I think that forward is an excellent introduction to what we're going to be talking about today and sharing some information. In essence of time, I'd like to maybe do my whole presentation, and then we'll do questions at the end. So if you'd hold your questions, make some notes, be happy to address those or make some comments at the end. So Rosie, we'll go to our next slide. All of you probably today came for a purpose. Some of you come to TRIAD all the time, I realize that, but others are here. I know some new faces sitting around, and we're really happy that you're here to maybe take some message back to your home church. So next slide. The agenda will be, I'm going to give you some historical background leading to our emergency handbook that we put together at St. Ansgar's, share some violence statistics assembled by Carl Chin, who is the nation's probably top church security expert. Talk about some deadly force incidents at American churches that have taken place, and then share with you our emergency handbook that we put together at St. Ansgar's. And again, I've got copies of that at the end of the presentation to hand out to all of you to take back to your home churches and maybe use it somewhere as a model to start your own if you don't have one. That document is not copyrighted at this time, and we're just very happy at St. Ansgar's to share it with you. I did most of the writing on it, and if you'd want to talk about that sometime, I'd be happy to do that with you also. Next slide. Lauren gave you a little background on how I got interested in this. April 29th of 2011 was where it started. We were invited to participate in a Concordia University St. Paul symposium, and Lauren failed to mention that he put that together. And Lauren and I are good friends at the church, and he suggested that we might attend. I think at the time I was the council chairperson in our church, and we thought it was a good thing to go to. It's sponsored by Church Mutual Insurance, and delegates that went from our church were Sharon Vangsness, who some of you might know, Carol Evanwood went, the late Al Thiem, Lauren went, and myself. So we had 5 there. There were 50 participants. At the time I thought, boy, this is a great program for only 50 people showing up, but we had a 10th of them from our church, and so it wasn't heavily attended, but the information was great. Okay, next slide. This is today's society, everybody, in my view, and the majority of us are innocent people, community people that are interested in our community and our congregations. Unfortunately, on the other side of the picture, we have the shark, the society predators. I refer to them as sex offenders, robbers, mentally ill, substance abusers, arsonists, bombers, etc., that could do us some damage. So unfortunately, that's what society is today, and whether we like it or not, that's the way it is in the street or in your community. I think we all have to be aware of that. There are, most of us, the high percentage would be on the majority, but there is a certain percent on that society predator list that we have to be concerned about. Next slide. And I did a little work last night, tried to pull up pictures of all our churches. Everything we talk about today is not just related to St. Ansgar's Lutheran Church. It could be related to any one of your churches, and you probably spot yours up there. The ones I could pull pictures out of the internet I put up there, and you probably see many of your churches up there. There's a few I couldn't download for some reason, so I couldn't get them up there. Next slide. Churches are, and I got this kind of from Lauren talking with him over time, are soft targets. You know, we think nothing's going to happen at our churches, but that makes us very vulnerable. We're soft targets. For a crime to occur, there has to be 3 factors present. And what they are, I was going to ask you, but I want to just run through this today. What do you think the 3 factors are? Next slide. Well, they involve 3 things. An individual who is willing to commit a crime, and they're out there. They are individuals who have a need or an objective of some nature. Then an opportunity has to present itself, and those opportunities can involve many things. I just wrote down a few. A purse left out or an unlocked car. Individuals known to be at church. Doors are open. Cash is known to be there. Children are there. So that is the opportunity that presents itself in our churches, as well as everywhere. Then you have to have a location for the crime. And an example is the building could be located in an area which presents itself to potential crime or is non-secure in security measures. And you think of our churches around Cannon Falls, so many rural churches. They're really vulnerable. And hopefully those people are watching out for crime, soft crime. Next slide. I think it's going to do a funny thing here now. Did it go? One more time.
Okay.
Oh, didn't do it. Didn't do a whirligig. It's supposed to whirl. Oh, did it do it?
I
Oh,
did it here, didn't do it there.
okay, didn't do it there.
Oh, I
All
know
right, motivating factors to church incidences. And I want to give credit to, for some reason that didn't show up on here either, to Sergeant Randy McAllister. He spoke at our meeting, when was it, Lauren?
A couple of years ago.
On the bottom of my slides,
A couple of months ago.
2 months ago, he was here. And this first part of my presentation, I want to give credit to Sergeant McAllister for his work. But factors that motivate or trigger the directed assaults in our churches, or in crime in general, 33.9% of it's related to an intimate relationship of some form. Another 13.7% is retaliation for some specific action. Another 10.1 is refused advances or obsession with the target. Another 10% is response to academic stress or failure. And then there's other ones you can see up there. You have a complete list, so I won't read every one of them to it. But it's good to know kind of what motivates. Now, why is the church then a good spot for this? Because people know people are going to be there. There are national instances where there's been divorces, breakups, separations, and why does the person pick the church as a spot to retaliate? Because he knows the other individual will be there at a certain time. Think of your own situation. Every Wednesday night you're probably at church doing something, or so these folks can read that into their planning too. So next slide. The plain truth is violent assaults have increased dramatically. Violence has increased in schools and universities. Violence is occurring in churches. Shootings are occurring in churches as much or more than targeted shootings occur in K-12 schools. They just don't get in the news as much. Colorado seems to have bad water out there, I think. There's been several churches and several schools. I don't know what the situation is out there, but why Colorado is so abnormally high in these. Again, a credit to Sergeant McAllister for that information. Next slide. Reducing risks in houses of worship then, your churches that you all belong to, 3 things. Denial kills. So if you don't do anything about it, you're open to something happening. So don't be in denial. Step up. Take charge of your facility and be willing to take action. And I know when I first talked to our pastors, honestly, at our church, I think they think the Lord will take care of it. Isn't that a general thought? You know, the Lord's going to take care of it. So we don't need to really do all this because it might hurt people's feelings if we check their backgrounds out. and everything. I think we have our pastors convinced now that that's not the proper way to look at it. You got to step up. Next slide. There's Carl Chin, church security expert, security advisor, author, speaker, and a researcher on church crime. What Carl does anytime, he asks that anytime a church crime occurs someplace in the country, that people send him the information. He must have some tie to the law enforcement group, and he gets this information and puts it in his database then that he's been creating. So I'm going to show you some of his data, and I want to again give him credit for everything you're going to see here on the next few slides. And I also put his website up there, and you have that on the handouts. If you ever want to go in and look at his, I'd recommend that you go in and look at his website, because he updates his data. Last time I updated my data that I'm going to show you, I think it was July of 2013. So there's another 6 months there. So you're going to see bigger numbers probably than what I'm showing up here. I think the percentages will be the same roughly, but the numbers of incidences will have increased a great deal. Okay, next slide. I think his book is around, I think I ordered it on the internet, about $15 or something like that, that book that I have here. So our first slide shows that there are 548 ministry violence statistics here. And you can see the breakdown of them. 16.4%, or 90 of those, was domestic spillovers, domestic relation violence that found its way onto the ministry property and resulted in DFI. Okay, everybody, what's DFI stand for? Deadly force incident. Deadly force incident. There were 14.9% personal conflicts. That's when there was a disagreement between two or more undomestic related people that erupted in a deadly force. 23.6% or 36% were robberies, and so on down the list are really large numbers. Next slide. If you put those all together, the number of DFIs, however, from sources of result in, the percent that result in deaths were 38.9. I bet that shocks you, doesn't it? It means there's been a lot of people lose their lives in churches throughout the country. Top 3 DFIs, next slide. 54.74% fall into the domestic violence, personal conflict, or robbery areas. So that's where your 3 biggest ones are. So we'll be talking about some things that I might suggest every church do, but how are you handling your cash in your church? Do you have a system where it's deposited every day, or leaving money in the church overnight on a regular basis? Not a good idea, because somebody's going to see it there. Domestic violence, how do you control that? We can try to make our ushers aware, watch for things, or greeters in our church, especially the usher group, to help out there a little bit. You see a suspicious individual, have a system ready. Same thing with personal conflict. If you know of someone in your church that we should maybe kind of just keep an eye on, maybe the ushers should know it, maybe, or something. So, okay, next slide is weapons used in churches. 59% of the time when these DFIs have occurred, it's due with guns. 17% knives, and then there's a couple of small areas. So 76% of the incident DFIs were due to guns or knives in the church. Next slide. Statistics not including suicides. Out of 817 DFIs, 355 people were killed. That's 43%. Another 56% were injured in the instances that Mr. Chin has studied. And males and females, Males were the biggest number, you can see there. Next slide. Aggressor statistics, most of the time you notice the one that is the most aggressive. Almost 92% of the time is going to be the male. And females make up the lesser amount. And the second part of that slide, you can see suicides also fall in the picture. You can see there also. And you can study the statistics over more. I don't want to dwell on them too much here, but just to make you start thinking a little bit. Next slide. Where these instances occur, most of them occurred inside the building, 33%, not inside the building I meant. 33%, most of them are outside the building, 67%. Parking lots are a target area for a lot of this. You can picture if, and I've got some documented cases here I'm going to read to you in a little bit, but we'll kind of watch for that as I talk about those. Events, 40% occurred during an event. 60% of them occurred in off hours at the church. Single attackers are the most obvious ones. Next slide. This one shows the instances of DFIs out of the total number of instances. But the thing I want to point out, starting in 2009, for whatever reason, look at the instance increase. And remember, my data is only through July last year, so that 58 is probably over 100. So for whatever reason, starting about 2009, the instances really shot up throughout the United States. Does that say our society is changing more, or what? Okay, next slide. This is kind of interesting here. Probably doesn't mean a whole lot, but notice non-denominational, these would be the churches that don't have, they have the names that don't relate to Lutheran or Congregational or Methodist, or they're kind of the new types of churches that are springing up in the country. They have the highest instances, 19.5%. And we get down to the Catholics there, and I have a great number of Catholic friends and certainly don't have any problem with the Catholic Church in general, but we all know the issues that they've had. You read more about it every day. It seems like every day you pick the paper up. How that went on for so long, I don't know. Probably you're all wondering that too. But that's, you can see they're up kind of in the higher level. You notice our Lutherans were pretty good people, I guess, 3.8. But that's just kind of interesting to look at. So he's charting all this kind of information. That's kind of interesting. All right, we'll look at some national cases now. Next slide. Things that could happen. Car robbery. Rhonda Rivers left her keys and her 2-year-old daughter in her unlocked van. She went down to the New Birth Missionary Baptist Church. Church's fitness center. During that time, an unknown criminal stole the van with a child in it. The child was discovered unharmed a short time later. So don't know why she didn't have her car locked, why her child was in the car alone, but somebody was there. Next slide. A robbery. About 10 a.m. on Monday, 2 armed men entered the Maggie Street Baptist Church demanding money. One of them hit one of the employees during the robbery. No shots were fired. Next slide. A bombing threat. 18-year-old boy made credible enough threats of murder at the Youth for Christ Church evacuated youth event on that Saturday. The boy is still at the site when officers arrived, expressed desire to kill other kids, and claimed he had planted explosives in the church. No explosives were found, but he was arrested for the threats and a bomb claim. Next national case, 14-year-old Ruby Zavala broke up with a 22-year-old boyfriend. He turned violent and possessive. He had previous sexual violence arrests. When Ruby, her mother, and a 3-year-old sister came out of the St. Michael Catholic Church on a Sunday after Mass, he was waiting in the family pickup truck, forced them into the truck at knife point. abductor left the mother and 3-year-old out and was apprehended later due to a massive manhunt. Next one, attempted murder. Consistent with how we often see it, Myrna Colacho met her violent ex-boyfriend. As astonished parishioners watched, Navarro became angry and stabbed her 20 times in her upper torso and head. She will live. Then he stabbed himself too, but he will live in incarceration. Next one, this is arson. As the congregation of 148 was in the Sunday morning service in the Kingdom Hall Church, 36-year-old Sanders Floyd Jr. set fire to the church front doors. Floyd used a combustible liquid he poured on the doors for the arson. Next one. Attempted abduction. Mother was briefly distracted, this sounds pretty familiar, as her 10-year-old daughter roller skated in the First Baptist parking lot. A man began chatting with the little girl, complimenting her on how pretty she was, that she could be a model. Then he asked her to get in his car with him. The mother approached and the man sped off. Police have no doubt an abduction attempt was interrupted at the last minute. So his parking lots are targets. Sex offender one. After meeting with police on a Friday morning to discuss his obligations as a registered sex offender, living in the community, 56-year-old Donald James Smith befriended 8-year-old Cherish Periwinkle and her mother. After a few hours of shopping with them on a Friday evening, he slipped away from the mother with the girl. The little girl's body was found the next day behind the Highlands Baptist Church. Middleton, Pennsylvania, 62-year-old Manette Bressler killed herself on the grounds of the Lima United Methodist Church. Her body was found in bushes at the front of the church. Why she'd pick that as a site, I don't know. But it's common. Next one, Hot Springs, Arkansas. A 4-year-old girl was playing in a Nazarene church with her brothers as her parents were working in the church on that Friday afternoon. She ran outside to play, and a man saw her, told her he had a secret, and grabbed her by the hand and led her away. The parents soon realized their daughter was missing and called the police. Police found her half a mile away, being led by the hand of 67-year-old Robert Gerald Walker, who told police he was her grandfather. So a lot of instances across the country, and I'm going to pass around. If you print out Mr. Chin's documentation, 15 pages of documented cases like this, I'll pass around so you can just kind of look at them. If you want to look at these, just go into his website. He puts them all up there. So I'll just pass those around for everybody just to get a look at. But how about Minnesota? Well, quite a bit. Lauren just handed me one this morning. All over the state, there's been cases like, just as I put up there, as serious or less serious, but North Mankato, 2 men charged with felony burglary and theft. North Mankato again, investigating after a church reported that a chalice worth more than $2,000 had been stolen. So they'd taken some valuable piece of equipment the church has and probably were going to sell it. Another Mankato seems to be having its trouble here. Mankato is offering a $1,000 reward to find out whoever broke stained glass windows and damaged an elevator at a church. St. Peter and Paul Catholic Church has been vandalized twice in recent months. Maple Grove has been defaced 4 times. It's the Pilgrims United Church of Christ, defaced 4 times in the last few months. This was July 31st, 2013. People threw eggs on the church, in addition to writing on the church. Another case, Temple of Israel, I think that's in Winona. No, this is in Minneapolis. Vandalized with graffiti during Jewish holy period of Passover. So just tons of articles like this. If you just Google and just type in church crime, Minnesota, you'd be surprised what comes up. So I'm going to pass some of these around too, just to give you some ideas on what's been happening. You can leave them on the ends, everybody, when we're finished. So a lot in Minnesota also. Okay, so now we'll get to our handbook, and again, I'd like to ask if you would like a copy for each church that's represented here today, or those of you that come on a regular basis, if you want to make sure one of these gets in the hands of the right individual in your own churches. Be happy to do that. And if there's two of you from one family, maybe just take one if you would. So our handbook, this would be the table of contents, I guess, if you look at it. When our handbook starts off with a 9/11 emergency call, how to do it. In fact, we had a great idea, and Lauren helped us out with this. We brought in our anybody interested, especially our ushers, one day at St. Ansgar's, and then we actually made a 911 call. Lauren had it all arranged with Goodhue County, and then we had it on the intercom system in our church so we could hear it. So when you make a 911 call, you know, what's the procedure? Because most people might be a little nervous about it, how to do that. So that might be an idea that you could all use. We also have a section, you notice, on our emergency telephone numbers in our church. Everything from the poison control, where to call if somebody accidentally got poisoned in the church with something, like a child ate something, anything can happen. And then we have an emergency procedure and phone tree, everybody. And that's our chain of command at St. Ansgar's as to how we're going to start this through our church if something happened. And you'll notice that, somebody give me a copy. I should have kept one here. Is there one extra one, Glenn, or somebody? That's good. So it starts out in our church with Pastor Gary Schultz. He'd be the first one identified. And then Gary would, if you follow along, he could call Pastor Carol Sinekin, our associate pastor at our church, and our council chairperson, who at that time was Sharon Bangsness. That's changed since this copy here for this year. I haven't updated this yet. And then she would identify the executive council members and make them aware of it. You can see how this is all just kind of flowing. And there's quite a few phone calls for her there. And then the church council would be called together if it's serious enough to determine a course of action. And we'd proceed from there. So we have this kind of laid out in our church as to what we would do if something would occur. Okay, the next section is usher duties and emergency guidelines in our church. And you notice the bold-faced ones. Most of it's general usher information here that we try to instruct our ushers to do. But the bold-faced stuff, it says ushers should be ready to respond to emergency issues during church services. Ushers should be able to utilize AED units. All of you have those in your churches? How well are your people trained to use them? Or is it just hanging on the wall? So we're talking about having another update in our church. I'd like to do it almost annually to make sure everybody knows how to do it. You may not have a nurse sitting there or a doctor or something someday, and somebody else would have to do it. So they should be ready to utilize them. And also, ushers should be ready to take charge in case of emergency medical conditions, misconduct, fire, weather, intruders, parking lots, instances, and so on. Just to make them kind of be ready. Nobody's going to be perfectly ready, we know that, but one usher should be assigned to observe the parking lot and inside church facilities during services. That means in our church we have 2 levels, so nothing wrong with just walking down in the lower level, just kind of walking through to see if anybody's down there that shouldn't be there. Simple type of thing. And they're also responsible to initiate the security phone tree if necessary. So that'd be the security end of the usher section, okay, there. Greeters, we kind of expect kind of the same type of thing. I'm assuming most of your churches have greeters, as we do. They usually stand by one of the main entries. Everybody comes by there. And if there's anybody that looks a little bit suspicious, why they might just mention it to the ushers or whatever. Normally it's not going to occur. It's always the same people. But so recognize suspicious visitors to the church. That's their main thing. Fire and smoke emergency guidelines are in here too. Kind of, do you have a plan like there was a fire at your church? How are we going to get them, where are you going to take them out? Where are you going to have people gather, get away from the church? Because people are kind of dumb about that when things like that happen, right? Everybody just kind of goes to, need some people to guide them, go over here, get away from the church so the fire trucks can come in, and so on. So it kind of talks about that in general without me reading it out to you. You guys can all read, right? So. Okay. Defibrillators, again, going back to those, there's some guidelines here. The person that put this on for us, and I know she'd be happy to do it for any of your churches, probably is Mickey Callister here in Cannon Falls. She came out and did a beautiful job for us at St. Ansgar's. We'll probably have her back this year again. But then I put together, I actually got this online. It kind of takes you through how to handle a situation like that. Should you be confronted with it. Batteries are a big issue with those units. You ought to check those batteries every year because they do wear out, even if you're not using them. Driver guidelines. Okay, we'll get into some topics that we've really clamped down on St. Ansgar's. I guess in general, you can read it, but they have to sign a document. We asked them to fill out this form about themselves. And there's some potent questions on there. Have you had a moving violation in the last 24 months? Have you had your driver's license suspended or revoked in the past 10 years? I think there's a question related to DWIs also. We're going to ask their driver's license number, whether they have to actually answer a question, are you insured? So we know they have insurance on their vehicle before they transport our children all over. So we're kind of identifying who's driving our children and are they good citizens at St. Ansgar's. Okay, and at the end I'm going to ask Lauren to make a few comments. He helped out a lot with this, where we get the information, because a lot of this is public information if you just know how to go in and get it. So if you have new members in your church, you don't know who they are, and they've started volunteering for a lot of things, which is great, but who are these folks? A lot of us know each other in Cannon Falls. We've been in the same church. I've been since 1971. So not to say that Lauren worked with somebody in law enforcement for 30 years or so, Lauren? And 25 years, and all of a sudden he showed up on the pedophile list. Shocking. So these things do happen. There is a volunteer driver guidelines there that they agree to, and so on. But read on your own. As I said, it's good information, but I know all of you guys can read. We also have a the drivers. Next slide, I guess. Chaperone guidelines. We're sending people without children everywhere, mission trips to out west, to camps and the like. We'd like to know at St. Ansgar's who is taking our children to these places. Who are these folks? So we're running checks on these folks as well. And they have to agree to this form that's in here. The form is actually presented by our church secretary, Ann Mariotto, when she finds about a trip, and we get volunteers, and these forms go out to those volunteers, they fill them out. And some of you are wondering, well, what do you do when they don't want to fill it out? Well, I guess the way we're looking at it, our church, is I guess they don't want to, we'd prefer not them driving it or being with our children. If they're not willing to fill this out, which is just nothing, right? To me, at least, I'll fill it out and sign it, no problem. But if they're not willing to do that, we'll probably find some other people, to kind of put it bluntly. Okay, chaperones. That's a big thing there. You know, they're up with the kids in hotel rooms and so on. And there's been all sorts of types of things like that occur. Okay, predatory is one. I think we haven't written same thing on predatory offender type things. You probably won't find a form in here, but what we're doing is we're going to get into the internet, however that's done by law enforcement, and find out who all the registered predators are around this general area, and just kind of go down and look at names and see if there's anybody that pops up that we should be aware of. And I might ask Lauren to say something about that later. He's really knowledgeable about that end of it. I want to give him a lot of credit on this handbook too, because he did a lot of the proofreading on it. I did the writing, he did the proofreading, and made suggestions here and there on how to state it in here. Church insurance, for some reason, didn't show up on my list here, but at St. Ansgar's, that's a big issue to us, and we're trying to review our insurance policy every 3 years because things change. Your property values change on your church, and you won't be able to replace your church for the same money 3 years from now. So we try to keep ours updated, raise the limits on our church. We're also watching our liability issues, like at our church, if I go on I'm on the council, it was on the council, our council members know they're covered $1 million liability. Or if this young man volunteered to go with our youth on a trip, he's got liability coverage of $1 million when he's traveling. So a lot of you probably don't know about your insurance. Our property committee kind of does that at our church through the finance committee. And but our goal is to review it every 3 years. So if you have any questions on that later. Severe weather response is in here too. In general, our weather response is going to go with the school. You all follow that? So what we try to tell our people at church is if there's no school, then maybe we shouldn't be having committee meetings that night and things like that for the same reasons, unless the school's way off, which sometimes they are, right? You wonder why they called school off. But in general, we're going to follow the local school districts as far as that would go. But there is a guideline in here for how we handle that. Then we have a guideline for using our church in general, the facilities itself. And we found that, a lot of groups come in, they like to use our church, and we like to think we're community-based, and we want people to use our church in our community. But we also want it clean. We want it kept up. And we have some expectations there on that. So that's what this section is talking about. Some guidelines for people using our church and what we expect of them when they leave and come too. That sort of thing. And we are, at this time, Jim Lundell at our church and one of our committees is updating this particular section right now, and it's probably going to be probably as good or better than what it is right now. Next area is medical consent forms. Anytime our children travel, just like the school, if a child has diabetes and we don't know it, and they're supposed to have insulin shots, that's problems, right, for the people on the trip. So we're trying to find out this medical information from the parents before they travel on trips and so on. Again, that's a liability issue, you know. A lot of this stuff is a liability issue to your personal church. And you could be a real fix. We all know how the courts are nowadays, and lawyers want to make money, so you got to watch out for yourselves. So there are some areas we're still writing everybody, catastrophe event guidelines, assaults, intruders, break-ins, and some other things. This is still a work in progress at our church. It's going to change all the time. It's not something we just wrote and it's going to be good for 20 years. Almost has to be reviewed every year. Suggestions will be made and the thing will be updated and made better over time. But it's a good start. That's what we had nothing like this in 2011. So we're happy with where we're at now, but we're certainly going to continue to try to upgrade it all the time. But you need, and one thing I didn't mention here also is one thing that should be on this list too is you ought to put together a security committee in your church and have some people on it that you think be very willing to do it. They have a lot of deep concerns like I do or you do. And meet, maybe you don't have to meet every month, but every 2 months or something like that, and as needed, and as needed. I think that would be a good committee to add to your working committees in your churches. One thing you want to get across to a lot of people is when we talk about security, the first thing they think is we ought to have guns in our church. We are not advocating that at our church at all, that you're going to have guards at the doors. We're looking at it more as a awareness, right? Make your people aware of these things and everybody can help out. We don't know in our church if somebody's packing on a given Sunday. Probably they might be. I know Lauren is licensed, but I just have a feeling he's generally not packing a gun on Sunday. But another thing is you don't want to get people on your committee. One thing I learned from reading Carl Chin's book, when they had this big incidents out in Colorado Springs with the church out there that was on the national news, Life something church out there. And this gunman came in there that there were a lot of, this got out to the congregation. It's a big congregation out there, and all of a sudden they had guys that were military people that they showed up to help with guns, which was way above Carl will talk about there. They got in the way. They got in the way because they wanted just to treat it like it was a military operation in Afghanistan. And the security team at that church looked at it far different. They had a plan. They knew what they were going to do. So you want to avoid probably, I don't know what's the right word, hotheads, or just want to, we're going to pull the guns out, you know, this sort of thing. So just want to mention that. I think that's it. All right, next slide. So what can you guys do, just kind of things you can do, and that's in the handout too. Things we think about at our church: adequate lighting, inside and outside. You know, have you got that taken care of? Install and maintain adequate lighting outside and inside. Okay. Train your ushers. Train your greeters. Encourage congregational members to lock valuables in car trunks, probably when you go to church. When Julie and I go shopping in the cities, invariably if she goes into a theater or something like that, she'll lock her valuables up in the trunk. They're open targets in the church. Be vigilant congregational members. Try to probably at some time maybe have a meeting in your church to go over this. I'd like to get our whole congregation together sometime to do this in our church. We, to be honest with you, have not done that. We'd had an adult forum I was asked to talk to, but only 30, 40 people show up out of 400. That's isn't that a true story in all your churches though? you don't get everybody there. Report incidents of concern to church administration, and one thing that we are responsible for, according to state rules, is to watch out for our children. If you have suspicions on abuse or sexual assault or anything, it's your duty to report it. Educate your congregation to your handbook, organize AED training sessions, secure your doors. This was a big problem we had at St. Ansgar's for years until we finally took care of it. We have 2 levels. During the day, we lock the doors downstairs. They're locked. Nobody can come in our bottom. They have to come in the front of St. Ansgar's to come into our church office area. If you aren't doing that now, lock your doors. Simple. Lock your doors if you're last to leave. If you have a committee meeting, take your or get the word out. Those committees are responsible to lock the doors. We've had instances where our doors are open, and that shouldn't be happening. Possibly install security cameras. We've talked about that at our church, especially our parking lots. But that's a cost item, and then probably is something down the future. Install movement lighting. You guys know what I'm talking about there. You have it in your garages. Lights come on when somebody approaches, that sort of thing. And I'll bet all of you in your churches, I know we're really fortunate at our property committee in our church, we have a plumber on it, we have an electrician on it. These are retired guys now. We have a construction man on it, Randy Redsiggle's on it. We have, what am I leaving out? Plumbing and heating. We have just a gentleman just retired, Carter Hayward, retired heating expert. You've got people like that in your churches to have them help you out. Jake Hollings, our lighting guy now, he does all our lighting. He's still working. So we have any thermostats or lights that are out, or we want to make changes to our lighting, he's doing it all. So use those people. They're really happy to help out.
Don't give them out names. They may convert them to their church.
They're not going, no, they're not leaving St. Ansgar's. But you've all got them too. Implement a security committee, that's on my list there, and develop a money deposit system within your church. I think you should try to avoid leaving any money in the church. I think in our church, Anne Marie Otto goes to the bank every afternoon prior to going home, like that. So next slide, in conclusion, this is what I think we all feel that are here. We as members of church congregations must remain vigilant to the fact that church crime is occurring in Minnesota, the United States, and that we must do our best to protect and secure our church and property, our young people, our seniors, and our entire congregation from preventable crime instances. There's a lot of things we can prevent just from this little list I had here, the lighting and so on. Don't leave any. I know in our church, Pastor Gary just shared with me that when he first came to St. Ansgar's, somebody took $40 out of his desk. And since then, his desk is locked, you know. And we've had instances, small instances at our church. We had is anybody here from First English? Okay. I got a question from them here prior to this meeting, how to relate to I think you called it hobos coming to your church. Transits. They're looking for money. Well, our church has a money account. People know if they're really in dire need, they can come to our church. What's it called, Lauren? Or similar. Good Samaritan. And we also have a community one. Well, these people are, they're looking for money, not to say they're not needing it, but this one gentleman came to our church as an example. Anne Marie was all alone in the church, and she recognized him as being somebody that had been there before, and we have some limits, on that. And she said, I don't believe we can do it, and he got ballistic, wouldn't leave, and so on. So we had to come up with system, how to handle that. And what we told Anne Marie was, if that happens again, excuse yourself, go into one of the other offices and you dial 911, and these folks will be up there probably within 5 minutes. So that's how we suggesting how we handle it at St. Ansgar's now is to do it in that fashion, because she was having trouble getting him to leave. And I guess he was a regular going around to all the churches and doing that, so. Okay, with that, I'll open it up for questions, if anybody have any. And we talked about all these phone calls all of you are getting now. They get about 2 seconds of my time. Normally you can tell those phone calls because nothing happens right away. If Lauren calls me and I'll say, Hobert's, and he'll say, hey, John, this is Lauren. Well, usually you hear a pause for 5 seconds, so you know it's a bad call. So I don't go any further. I don't know what the rest of you do. I'd suggest you do that. We have websites that we are able to go into, and they're all public domains so that we can utilize that information, and we could certainly share that with some of you.
Is there a cost to that background check?
There is to one, which one is Lauren, to run, it's $5 for a,
You can pay a lot of money for a
Yeah.
background check.
now, you could certainly call our church secretary, Anne Marie Otto. She does that work for us. I'm thinking some of those are $5 to $10. Very, very, very economical. You aren't going to run that many of them during a year. You know, it isn't like you aren't spending thousands of dollars for that type of thing. So it's out there for you to use. Anne Marie would be able to give you, she does most of that work for us, so I don't think she'd mind, we don't mind sharing. And you can always talk to Lauren. He's has really the excellent background on that. But I appreciate being here today, and I hope I gave you a few ideas to take with you. And if some of you would be interested in this presentation, if you have something like an adult forum in your church or something like that, would be a topic that would fit, I'd be happy to do that. I've got the material ready, so I'm very, very willing to share it. Okay, well, thank you for coming, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it.